Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks, and let's bring in our next guest, and that's going to be Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio.com. Thanks for joining us, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, we're talking more retail right up LikeFolio's alley here. Megan, if you look at some of the reports that have been coming out, whether it's Macy's or Kohl's, we're starting to see some really good reports because demand is there, consumers strong. But we're starting to see these stocks pull back from post-earnings rallies, and now we're starting to see some retailers really starting to plunge, Dick's Sporting Goods being one of them. What kind of data are you guys seeing in Nordstrom ahead of their report?
Yeah, I think that you set up a really interesting scenario. Whenever we look at this from a consumer demand perspective, across the board, we're seeing a lot of strength in these retail names. We're seeing consumers who are talking about going out and they're going shopping, and they're not necessarily balking at these higher prices. And I think one common theme that we've noticed in the past 2 weeks really is that these retailers who weren't afraid to kind of flex that pricing power, they were rewarded more than those who tried to keep that pricing like insulated. Think of the Walmarts and the Targets versus the Macy's and the Kohls and even the TJ Maxx's. And so whenever we look at Nordstrom, we wanted to look at this versus Macy's and Kohl's specifically, just because this is kind of one of those traditional mall-based retailers. I think that Nordstrom is in a different world when it comes to its perceived quality and its perceived consumer happiness. So, you can kind of take that with a grain of salt, but you can see where Nordstrom falls comparatively as we head into this holiday quarter. And it looks like, we are seeing some traction. You see these mentions for Nordstrom that are building on a quarter-over-quarter basis, but not quite the explosive improvement that we saw out of Macy's from last week. But I will note that, this is building on top of last quarter for Nordstrom, which encompassed their anniversary sale. So it is impressive that Nordstrom is able to continue to build on the success from its anniversary sale heading into this holiday season.
All right, Megan. I am now the retail czar of the United States. And I have appointed Megan Brantley as the CEO of Nordstrom. Okay, now you've got Nordstrom full line, you've got Nordstrom Rack, you've got Trunk Club, you've got Jeffrey Boutique, you've got Last Chance Clearance. What would you do to change Nordstrom to make it more competitive with these other companies that Nordstrom Rack seems to be their diamond in the rough, right? And it's enormously popular. I've got one a half mile from my house, and it is enormously popular. What is it that Nordstrom is not doing right or not doing well enough, Megan?
I think that one thing that Nordstrom is starting to do now is starting to leverage that Nordstrom Rack, like you mentioned, and they're starting to, kind of utilize the presence of this Nordstrom Rack store to even fulfill these online Nordstrom orders. Whenever Nordstrom talked about its anniversary sale, 40% of the next day pickups from that anniversary sale were picked up in a Rack store. So I think that as Nordstrom continues to leverage this, it can continue to boost this omni-channel presence, because that's what we see a lot of times from consumers. We see people who, they want to be able to go and pick up their items immediately. They maybe don't want to have to worry about delivery delays. So Nordstrom's in a great position when it comes to the fact that they do have these Nordstrom Rack stores. And I think you can see this traction from Nordstrom Rack that we're starting to pick up into this quarter, even outpacing the momentum that we're seeing in the flagship brand. And so when we look at these Nordstrom Rack mentions, those are pacing up about 15% quarter over quarter. And so that's a bit higher than the total, all-encompassing Nordstrom brand. And it even is outpacing, what we're seeing out of TJ Maxx and Marshalls. I think that Nordstrom does have a kind of an edge when it comes to their loyalty. Whenever we look at a lot of these consumers, the happiness is very high, and it's actually improving. Happiness is up about 2 points year over year, because consumers talk about when they can go into a store, they typically have a good experience. So I think that the two main things that Nordstrom probably needs to keep doing is to continue to leverage that Nordstrom Rack so that they can, reduce the amount of time that it takes for a customer who maybe orders something online to either pick it up that day or have it delivered sooner. And then also continue to focus on that consumer happiness and that continued loyalty whenever consumers are shopping in a store, because this is how they really differentiate themselves from peers.
Yeah. Now, Megan, full disclosure, I've been to Nordstrom Rack about 6 times since my son graduated from high school into college, whether it's clothes shopping, prom shopping, whatever. But one of the things I noticed going into a lot of the Nordstrom stores, they've got a great one here in Chicago, is the fact that they didn't have any inventory. I mean, the stores were bare. The rack stores were bare. The major store that they have on Michigan Ave was bare compared to what it has been in the past. Does your data differentiate, as far as positive mentions and store visits? Does it distinguish between online sales and in-store sales? Because you mentioned that everybody seems to like the experience of going to the stores, but it just seemed like they didn't have any inventory. Is that going to be an issue?
That's a really good question. One way that could show up is if we were to start to see sentiment start to slide, and we would start to see people talking about not being able to get their hands on the product, or if people started talking about a low selection. Overall, we're seeing sentiment has actually increased by about 2 points year over year. So I think that that's positive. But from a digital perspective, I think that definitely is an area of growth for them. Whenever we look at these digital order mentions specifically, those are pacing up about 17% quarter over quarter. So we are seeing a lot of consumers who are at least talking about ordering online, and then maybe they go in store to pick up their item. And so I think the kind of refinement of this process is critical moving forward for them. But that's definitely an area of strength comparatively, that digital growth versus just the traditional store mention.
Hey, Kev, I wanted to see if you had another question for Megan, but it seems like we've talked about Nordstrom for years on the show, in different parts. But Kev, if you look at this, it seems like the excitement always gets there for Nordstrom. Then we see some mismanagement. We've seen that on a few quarterly reports, whether it's inventory management. They're late to the game as far as fulfillment goes for e-commerce, but they finally started to correct that. Do you have any other questions for Megan based on that stuff going into this? Because the consumer is still strong.
Megan, when you look at Nordstrom Rack, can that be enough to make this company profitable? What is your score going in for Nordstrom for the earnings report? Because obviously Nordstrom Rack is slowly but surely becoming a bigger and bigger part of this company, but is it enough to turn this company around? The stock's down 4% today, Megan.
Yeah, it's a great question. Whenever we look at this score, our earnings score right now is specifically being driven by this near-time buzz and this growing demand that we see into this holiday season. We have Nordstrom at a 39. To give scale, we had Macy's around a 50. So we are seeing this positive traction. We are seeing consumers who are talking about shopping at Nordstrom more than they were. And so, we like this momentum that we're seeing, but what we can't capture is, how they're managing costs. Maybe are any inventory concerns, things like that, those management practices isn't necessarily going to show up in our data. So I think that's definitely something to be aware of, because as we've seen, a lot of these companies have put out some strong reports and then been punished afterwards. So I'm interested to see how you guys are going to trade this one.
All right, great stuff as always, Megan, helping us break down Nordstrom into earnings. Thank you very much. Have a great day, okay? Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio.com.